All right, Dad, it is Monday, July 22nd, and are you ready to be unburdened by what has been?
I'm looking forward to it. I
So what do you
mean,
make what do you make of all this? This Biden dropping out, and then he didn't actually endorse Kamala Harris right away in his first statement, and
right.
then it looked like just
Shortly
something
thereafter, he did.
right,
Yeah,
but it was on his personal Twitter. The whole thing
right.
is weird. I
Uh,
don't is this even allowed? Like, what's happening? What's going on?
well, yeah. I mean, it's certainly. I mean, a presidential candidate can withdraw at any time. I mean, there's
But
no
can he
law.
just say that this is the new nominee? But Kamala Harris, is she the new
Okay,
nominee?
well,
Or
I, I mean, she has. They haven't had their convention yet. I mean, she's not going to officially be, right, the presidential candidate until she's been, um, approved by the connection, by the convention. So, but if everybody's lined up behind her, and then it's likely that she will become the presidential candidate. Technically, it's possible somebody could come out of nowhere and take it, but there's just nobody has stepped forward, right? So it doesn't look like there really is an alternative at this point.
there doesn't seem to be anything democratic about this process. Right? This is the whole Democrats are going on about this fight for democracy, and it seems like this has been the most undemocratic.
Right.
There's no primary. There was
Right.
no
Yeah.
opponents, and now what? We have this dementia president that is going to
Right.
step down and just anoint somebody, or there's going to be the elite
Yeah.
oligarchs at the convention
Right.
that
And
says
this is
this
somebody-
is now the candidate.
Right. Right. And this is a candidate who never, won a single delegate back in 2020. Had very little popular support. I remember the opinion polls back then would show her in the single digits, usually at the bottom of the list of candidates. Yeah, but now they decided that she would tick the right boxes. I think basically, and so she was made the vice presidential candidate. I don't think they ever thought that she would become the president, but then, their plan to shield Biden from public view and hide his declining cognitive abilities from public view failed. When he went out on the stage in the debate, everybody saw it and they said, "Oh, damn, this didn't work." They had to get rid of him. Yeah, the donors said, "Okay, we're not giving him the money," and then that was over. So anyway, there's very little that's democratic about this process.
Do you think that the whole thing is a little bit weird to me, fishy? Because you think that Biden should come out and address the nation about this? This is a
I
big
think he's,
deal, right?
Yeah,
It's
I
gonna-
believe he's going to do it sometime this week. He's promised to give some sort of address to the nation.
Is this crazy to think that he was just like taking a nap and his staff or the administration just said, "Okay, we just got to do this," and then did it, and he just woke up and was like, "Well, what? I guess I know." And they convinced him somehow that, "Yeah, you wanted this, Mr. President. That's what you said." And he's like, "Okay." Like the whole thing just seems weird to me.
Well, the rumors were that he was going to make an announcement on Sunday. And so,
But
it wasn't
the thing
really
is-
a big surprise that it happened
The
yesterday.
thing is, it doesn't feel like he makes the announcement. It feels like there is the establishment makes the announcement. The establishment made the decision. It doesn't sound to me like this was his decision.
Right.
It sounds like he was being
well,
forced, and I don't think he wrote any of these things. Like,
Yeah.
did he?
Well, I think he doesn't write his own speeches or I think anything. They're all written for him. I think that's been true for a long time. That's actually true of a lot of presidents and presidential candidates. An exception, actually, to this rule is J.D. Vance, who apparently wrote his own speech. I mean, he's a very capable writer. But most of these guys aren't. Well, Trump didn't even have a speech. He just got up there and just started droning away. But anyway, I think, look. Yeah, he's barely in charge, but he's still. I think he had to make the decision, and he just received increasing pressure. It came to the point where he realized, I think you don't have the money, you don't have all the major media have turned against you. A lot of the Democratic leadership, it's over. Joe.
Right.
You know,
So
you
he
gotta-
was.
so
I mean, he
accepted
didn't want
it.
to make the decision,
Yeah.
but he was forced. This,
Right.
Could you say? Is it too crazy to say this is almost like a little coup within the Democratic Party? Is that an absurd statement? Is that hyperbole?
Well, it's hyperbole, but it's you could almost describe it that. I mean, in the end, it was his decision. He could have stayed, so I don't think we can actually call it a coup.
Nobody's heard it from his own mouth, though, that it was
Yeah.
his decision, right? It's just
Right.
everybody says he's got to go, and every time
Yeah.
he comes out there, he's like, "Guess what? I'm
Yeah.
not leaving." You know.
Well, if he comes
So-
out like the next time he appears, he says, "Don't believe that stuff they said about me leaving. I'm still here." Then we know it was an attempted coup. Yeah, well, I mean, with his case, it's hard to actually say what's a coup and what isn't. I mean, he's just barely there. It. You could say
pressure
he
that
obviously was pressured, but in the end, I think you'd have to say it was his decision. So I think if somebody wants to call it a coup, I think it's a slightly hyperbolic, but clearly there was pressure. Where he wasn't actually forced at gunpoint to leave his office. He wasn't arrested or anything. So I don't know that it was a true coup, but
right.
it was very
But
close
withholding funds, pressure,
Right.
who knows what other pressure they put on people, and then he's probably negotiating a golden parachute with the state. The vibe that I keep getting though from the Democratic Party is that you're going against this machine. It's not really there's no person really in charge. I mean, that's obviously what we had with Biden. He's clearly not making decisions. Of course he's not writing his own speeches, but beyond that, he doesn't seem. It just seems to be the machine is moving forward, and now the machine is just going to produce another
figurehead, right?
flesh. Yeah, just a bag of flesh up there to say that this is your president and your leader, but they're not actually making decisions. That's the vibe I get more and more, and I think that's why Trump and J.D. Vance resonate more with people. Even if you don't love Trump and the way he speaks, it's like, well, he's not part of this blob machine. Like Trump gets up there and, like I said, he doesn't seem to have a speech right. He just rambles. Right. And J.D. Vance is intellectually competent enough to have his own thoughts. But you don't see any of that in the DNC. It's just
at this point, right? Well,
this
this
evil
has been
little closed group will just
right.
select somebody for us.
Yeah. Well, it's part of a long-term trend. I mean, it was just, I don't know how many years ago that the Democrats went with the superdelegate system, and then Super Tuesday. They started fiddling with the primaries and the caucuses and so on. They did everything to actually prevent outsiders from winning the nomination. And then, we saw what happens. So they have these superdelegates, just a certain number of people that are guaranteed to vote for the establishment candidate at the convention, right? And then you front load everything. You have the primaries clustered up at the beginning. You don't have a separate Iowa caucuses or, New Hampshire, because there's a chance that somebody can actually go there and press the flesh and change minds on the ground. And you end up with a surprise candidate, an unimproved candidate, a candidate not approved by the Democrat establishment. They did everything they did possible to prevent surprises. They want their hand-picked candidate. That's something that they've been working on for decades. But it just kind of reached ridiculous heights recently, or depths, so in the case of Biden, there was just no competition. He was just hidden from public view. And, they thought that they had everything all wrapped up, but then they underestimated his senility, his dementia. And
that's so crazy that they could even do that.
Right. It just seemed like, with all this,
somehow
calculation and plotting and whatever, it was just, there was this glaring problem. Like, hey, wait a second, you got a dementia patient here. Maybe you ought to do something different.
And maybe I think they really thought that they could just pump him, with enough meth or drugs or whatever to get through the debate enough to just push him over the finish line, and then that's all they cared about. They obviously don't care that he was in decline and that he isn't capable to serve even now, much less the next 4 years.
Well, they may even prefer it. I mean, they want to run the government, right?
Right.
So it's just
true. Maybe that's the perfect thing.
Yeah, but it's a dangerous. See, the thing like Trump, they don't like Trump because, well, they had a pretty good record of getting him to do what they wanted him to do. I mean, the Republican establishment, which is not really that different from the Democratic establishment, during his first term. But occasionally he shows a tendency to kind of wander off the plantation. And it was sometimes, and he obviously spoke his mind, even when he didn't carry through. That was all very distressing. There was somebody they'd rather have, I think, a dementia patient, somebody in a wheelchair back there, and they can do what they want to do. This guy, maybe he didn't really know how to gum up the works and carry through different policies, maybe with a very few small exceptions like immigration. But yeah, just the fact that he would get out there and shout these things, it was very unnerving for them and disturbing, and they'd rather not have most of the establishment definitely doesn't want to have a Trump.
Just the audacity of the Democrats to say that this election is a fight for democracy. It's just such a slap in the face to all Democrats. Really, just wake up and see, like, in 2020. Clearly, what the Democratic population wanted, not the elite, not the Democratic elite wanted. They wanted Bernie Sanders. He was clearly the most popular candidate for the Democrats, and he was really, Bernie Feel the Burn was really a movement that gripped the nation, but it wasn't acceptable. So they just slid Joe Biden in that nobody's really excited about, and then they don't have any primaries here. If they allowed RFK to actually debate, he would have demolished Biden, of course, and he would have demolished Trump. RFK is incredibly smart. He's incredibly civilized. He's a great speaker and debater. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but he would have been, a fantastic candidate, for the Democrats to have. And if he was the head currently, if he was allowed to compete in the primaries and actually win and speak and people can hear his positions, I guarantee you we would be the nominee. He would have been the nominee if we had an actual democratic process,
or at least
primary,
right? Or at the very least, if people saw him debating Biden, they would have been aware of the problem, the dementia problem back then, and the Democrats would have been forced to deal with it back then. It would actually have been better for the Democrats, even the establishment, say, that's the problem. I think I mentioned it last time. It's sort of like become a Soviet system. If you have everything, you do everything in secret, and you don't have to ever, let's say, test your product, by just putting them out there and seeing how the people respond. You get into fixes like that, like what we see right now. Because they kind of, again, took the old Soviet approach and said, this is the leader that we've appointed for you. And then it was like, oops, we didn't run any tests on this particular leader year. It was...
What a clown show.
Yeah, really.
It really is. What kind of candidate Kamala will be? Do you think she's going to be... does she have nobody has a chance against Trump. That's the thing. Yeah. Trump, I think, has been elevated to like folk hero status now, thanks to that assassination attempt.
I mean, it's hard. It's hard to say. I think definitely the smart money is on Trump. I know that she is not at all charismatic. She doesn't do well with crowds, or I think even in small groups. She just she's from California. As a state that's really not representative of the nation. So there are a lot of reasons to be very pessimistic if you're a Democrat, about her chances. But I wouldn't completely write her off. I'm just thinking, because, I think there's very little enthusiasm, maybe, close to zero enthusiasm for her. But that was true of Biden, too, back in 2020. I mean, it was obvious, he never left his basement back then, right? And then Trump was going to rallies and there was a lot of enthusiasm about him. There is a huge enthusiasm gap. But, that's, in the end, it's just a number of votes. And the whole question is, how many people are going to vote against Trump? I don't think anybody's going to really be voting for Kamala Harris. I think at least very, very few. But there is that anybody but Trump vote that's pretty substantial still, right? And it probably won't be enough, but it's, I think we might be surprised by, how many people get out there and vote for her, hold their nose and vote for her just so that they can prevent Trump from taking office.
Right. Yeah. Like we said before, I think there are like 20-30% of the population that are just,
No matter
die
what,
hard,
actually hate him.
hate him, and they believe he's the second coming of Hitler, Trump derangement syndrome, full blow.
There are other people who don't, aren't deranged that way, but they do have a very strong prejudice against Trump, and they may just again vote for Harris just for that reason.
Do you think that the media will still keep up this? If this is a vote for democracy, that right now this election is the most important election of our lifetime because this will be where democracy dies if Trump is elected.
I think they probably will.
For Kamala.
I think, yeah.
But how can you have that message anymore when there's nothing democratic about having someone like Biden or Harris?
I don't think they see the absurdity of their position.
But a lot of Democrats have to be feling that, right? Like young Democratic supporters, like they got to think, like, why don't we have a choice? Why don't we get to vote? Why don't we have, why do this elite get to decide that this is our candidate and we pretend that we have a choice? It's a democracy.
Well, it's just, it's ridiculous. But throughout the West, you have elite who, they've developed this understanding of democracy that has very little to do with the traditional definition of democracy. Their idea of democracy is just actually, towing the line on certain issues, taking certain positions. Apparently, like being anti-immigration, that makes you a potential fascist and a threat to democracy, right? Even if the vast majority of your voters support you. Just look at Viktor Orban or Le Pen in France. Right. But there's a number of the cultural issues, the LGBTQ plus, and that's democracy. And actually opposing Russia, that's democracy. If you actually want to seek peace with Russia or China, then obviously you love autocrats or dictatorships, so-called, and you're an enemy of democracy. I think in their minds that's what it's become. Democracy is having these beliefs that are the core beliefs of the elite in the West. And it's, of course, absurd. It just doesn't. They've changed the definition of democracy.
To do about the will of the people.
Yeah, right. It's just
populism.
Right, exactly. Because they've identified all these positions, the opposing positions as being, fascist or crypto-fascist or possibly neo-Nazi or something. And so they're saving us from, this evil. Of course, all these positions are supported in many cases by a majority of voters in these different countries, the ones these positions that they've demonized. And were considered absolutely normal sometimes 10, 20 years ago, or very much, even in the mainstream. They still are in the mainstream, it's just because, look, it's a majority of people that think it, so it's hard to say it's not, but they've decided that it's not mainstream and it's unacceptable. And, they've created this, they've created this boogeyman, and you say, well, the alternative to the boogeyman is us. That's democracy.
But surely that's not a winning position to take. It seems like they don't have anything else to. Clearly the most common sense thing is to talk about your solution to the problems that the country's facing. To talk about this, but the only thing they do is they always. I feel like Democrats always do this. They choose this kind of large amorphous problem, like racism, climate change, democracy, and then we got to fight to save these things and do these instead of actually talking about real issues that people have and concrete, plans to solve them. I just don't hear anything coming out of their side. Just like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's debate these issues. Let's have rigorous debate. But of course, we don't have any debate within the Democratic Party anymore. It's just these are the positions that you have to subscribe to, and we push forward to them, and everybody tries to get behind it. But I don't think if that's all the Democrats have, then their party is in real trouble. Like you can't. They need to have something real, and they're.
Well, you see it again. It's just throughout the West. These elites have resorted to, elite machinations like what we've seen with Biden. It's just and Harris, right? This has very little to do with the will of the people, and they're pushing forward these candidates, and then, okay, they're in a tough fix now, but they'll pull out all the stops, to support her. And the vast majority of the mainstream media, really every major media outlet except for Fox News is going to be behind her and continually declaring that she's the absolute most qualified candidate in in the history of this country, and so on and so forth. And then there may be some sort of October surprise, or something like a repeat of the Hunter Biden laptop story, right? Or in that case, it was the suppression. They'll do what they can, but I don't think it'll be enough.
Right. People's eyes are opened.
Yeah, I think, well, certainly, at least like half of the people. There's a lot of, these recent events must have made a lot of people who are kind of in the mushy center rather cynical. And I'm sure a lot of Democrats very cynical, but we'll see.
When Biden, released that statement saying that he was not going to be running for next year, he's not going to be running for the presidential nominee ticket. He didn't state why he was stepping down, right? So we all know why he is, but then the big question is like, well, should he still be president then if he clearly doesn't have the faculties to run a campaign? Then can he be running?
Maybe that's why. That's probably why he didn't state it. That's why he says,
but everybody knows it.
Right. Yeah, that's something that a lot of people brought up very correctly. Especially the Republicans. That if he's not qualified to run, he's really also not qualified to be serving as president now.
Do you think that they're going to try to push him out? Do you think there will be something invoked with the 25th Amendment? And
I think not. I think that's probably that's what they got out of him, and they're just going to try to keep him like off stage as much as possible. Since he's not running, he's just going to be in the background, and he's going to go to bed early, and the usual suspects, Blinken and Jake Sullivan, they're going to be running the country, and that's their plan.
Well, I mean, he's still commander in chief. Do you think things are more dangerous now that he's still president and he knows he has nothing to lose because he's not running? His own party's kicked him out, and he might be just a bitter, angry old man, and maybe he wants to watch the world burn, or maybe he thinks that, I got to start chucking some Hail Marys and maybe I can save my legacy instead of being this guy that is remembered as this dementia patient that refused to step down and went too long and handed the Republicans, Trump, the biggest victory in history, because that's what's going to happen.
Right.
I just, and so it does scare me a little bit. It's like, is he going to be like,
exactly. I mean, he's not all there. So it's just like, who knows what,
but he's very angry.
That's right. He's very angry. He hates the Russians. He seems to hate the Chinese too.
He's got his coke-fueled son in his ear that's, that's very embedded in Ukraine. So it's just like, ooh.
So who knows? Probably not, but it's you're right to worry about it. Who knows?
All right. Well, I'll try not to think about it too much. I got too much to worry about in my normal life. Part of me almost feels like part of me kind of wants the left to win this next presidential election, just because the problems that are in our country are so deep and ingrained that they're going to explode and exacerbate under a Trump presidency as well. I feel like Trump is overpromising so much. Right. And I get swept up in it. I get excited. I'm like, this is cool. Hulk Hogan's there. Yeah, everyone's getting, pumped and talking. And there's a good message talking about, bringing back manufacturing and these forever world wars. But the reality is that we have $35 trillion of debt.
Right.
You want to rebuild the manufacturing base? That's a 10, 20-year plan. That's not something you can flip a switch and turn it off.
That's been a continual problem. It's actually just that, economic cycles are really independent of presidential terms. But every president brags about, what what the economic indicators were under his term. And it may have very little to do with anything that he did, during his term. It could have been something, policies that were put in place or decisions made by various corporate executives, 10, 15 years earlier. And then you're seeing the payoff, right? And then often there are things that are, the best kind of economic policies often involve short-term pain.
It does, exactly.
Right.
Right. We're going to have to go through a lot of short-term pain. I mean, especially he's talking about these tariffs, which is like, okay, maybe if you apply, if you do tariffs, I do agree with protectionism to some extent, especially when you need to rebuild our current manufacturing base. But it's a long process, and you can't single out just China. You need to do something, let's say, straight 15-20% tariff on all imported goods. I think that's what you do. Right.
There's this mistake of always kind of doing it in a hostile way, like we're going to penalize this country over there. You just don't need to approach it that way. I mean, that just adds to tensions, creates the possibility of a trade war. But if, like you said, if there were just a general tariff, for all imports, then nobody can accuse you of starting targeting one country or another.
Right, and actually allows for arbitrage and loopholes anyway.
It would actually bring the U.S. in line with a lot of countries, because my understanding is most countries do have a general tariff, and our tariffs in general are quite a bit lower. So if we just brought them in line with the world level, we just create a level playing field, and that really I think it probably would lead to higher prices, especially in the short run in this country. But it
absolutely,
yeah. But it wouldn't, wouldn't cause, I think, severe economic damage, and it could eventually help, manufacturing to rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, what you could do is I love when they talk about unleashing energy, lower prices for for energy that will also help the manufacturing base here. Slap a flat 10% tariff on all imports. You are going to see an increase in prices, so inflation is going to go up. But like I said, the manufacturing base is going to take a generation to build. Right. It's not going to happen soon. So what I think may likely happen is he'll try to implement some of these things. We'll see prices rise as a result of the tariffs. People will be yelling at him. He'll have pressure to do maybe lower interest rates, to put more money in. We might see more inflation. We might see a dollar collapse on Trump's watch, and everybody's going to be like, this is all Trump's fault. Look what he did. And it's like, no, actually, he was part of the problem during his presidency. It's true. We got to call a spade a spade. He was, not physically conservative at all, spending like a drunken sailor. Right. And Biden was even worse, But the problem is going to blow up soon, and it could blow up while the Republicans are, while Trump is president, and then we're just going to fall back into the cycle and just going to degrade. It's like, this is why countries like Russia and China and Singapore do better, is because they develop 10, 20, 50-year plans. We develop plans for today and maybe tomorrow. That's about it.
Or maybe 4-year plans or something.
I feel like they're not even 4-year plans.
Yeah, maybe. You're probably right. Yeah.
Trump just has this. He's just, we said yesterday that happiness equals reality minus expectations, or the previous podcast. They have to manage expectations. The expectation that Trump is giving everybody is he's saying, once I'm in power, just boom. Yeah, I'm going to turn this whole thing around. You remember how great it was? Yeah. All of a sudden, it's like, no, it's not going to happen. And there's going to be a lot of, maybe there are a lot of good things that him and J.D. Vance will want to do, and maybe puts Vivek in his cabinet to try to clean house. But there's going to be so much pushback and screaming and yelling and short-term pain, right? There's all that no pain, no gain. That there's a reason there's that saying.
Yeah.
If you want to fix what we have,
in economics.
Right. So if you want to fix the problems in the United States, we have to go through that pain. But our political system doesn't allow for that. Right. Our political system only allows for more spending, more short-term promises, which will eventually lead to the big collapse, which I think is coming. It's inevitable, and it'll probably happen. I think very likely 50% chance it'll happen during Trump's presidency.
Yeah,
and then
I think you're probably right. Yeah,
and then everybody's going to blame, like, oh, wish we had Biden back. If only we had the Democrats in power.
Right.
That's what upsets me.
Yeah, well, that's
I convinced myself I'm voting Kamala Harris, Kamala, 2024.
Yeah,
Let her
right.
inherit this
Yeah.
this
Well,
dumpster fire
yeah,
of an economy.
right.
You know.
Well, actually, you're talking about how it's going to take a while to build up manufacturing again. I mean, we've had actually recent proof of this, right? Just in the context of the Ukraine war.
Let me say,
there's
is
been
it
this-
the Reuters stuff?
Yeah, that's one example. I mean,
Okay.
it's just that,
I'll let you go.
yeah, there's this sudden realization. It's like, wow, we actually can't make much, we don't produce many artillery shells and whatever. And then it turns out that we don't even make gunpowder or TNT or, the really basic things. You just assume we've got to have a bunch of factories. No. So it's just like, okay, we're going to start making shells, and they realize they don't even have, the supply chain within the country to do it. And you just don't have the workers. And so they initially promised, okay, we're going to get up to 1.7 million and just like the end of this year. And now it's, we're lucky to do a third of that within 3 years. And that same thing is happening. They're setting back targets to 20, 30, 20. And it's, so, that tells you that this is a nearly intractable problem. It's not something that's going to be solved within a single presidential term. And, probably the efforts, again, that the first steps that you're going to take are not going to produce the results. In fact, they're going to have negative consequences short term. So we really, I don't think anything really will be done, or if they attempt to do it, whoever does it, like Trump, if he'll pay the consequences, then somebody will come in and reverse it, and we won't get anywhere. It's almost
exactly.
like what you can almost. I mean, it seems to me like the only scenario that I can imagine where we could actually choose the correct economic policy course would be if there's just a total collapse to the point where everybody realizes, okay, we're really screwed. We're in bad shape. We got to do something different to get out of this hole. And at that point, people are willing to listen to, okay, these short-term sacrifices and whatever. But we're not there yet. We're not anywhere close. Of course, the danger is that you can get into that fix, and then people will seize on some sort of terrible solution that will make sure that we never get out of the hole too. So,
Right. So this collapse is coming, and, I hope it happens within the next 6 months. So, it's
not
on
impossible.
Biden's plate, but I think it's unlikely. And so I think it's likely that we're going to see some real collapse on Trump's plate. And then that's just going to fuel even more into this Trump derangement syndrome. And we're just going to go through this again. And I just, as a nation, I don't know if we'll survive that. No, it's just going to get it's going to get rocky. I mean, can you think of any time you're an old person, you're an old man.
Yeah.
Can you remember any time in your long life of politics being as crazy as it is right now?
Well, I can just remember my youth in the 60s in Berkeley, and there were riots. I remember rioters hiding in our front yard, actually, and the police coming by, and you could see that their windows were taped, and they were firing rubber bullets into the bushes in our front yard. It was pretty wild back then. But, it's just like the people that ran the country, you talk about Nixon. I know a lot of people hated Nixon, and sometimes for, the good reason. But the guy was actually very smart, very capable. He understood the world that he lived in. And, we didn't have a dementia patient. We didn't have anything like that. I mean, even like under Reagan, there was talk about like his cognitive, he was getting rather old, but it was just, he was a little bit senile, but it was just nothing like that. We didn't have any Hulk Hogan's that are conventions. I mean, within it was actually still pretty, by current standards, it's all very tame. Everybody seemed to, there was a certain decorum and so, they were sort of wild. Let's say, put it this way. It got kind of wild on the streets, but it didn't really get wild, up at the higher levels
The upper echelons.
of government and politics. I mean, that was actually pretty predictable, and it changed, but it changed slowly. Now we're just seeing just really stuff that I thought I would never see in my lifetime. The kind of candidates that we have and the sort of debates that we have, if you want to even call them. I mean, it was just like those those old debates actually were so much more. Back then we thought, oh, we're becoming very superficial. It's turning into entertainment, but it wasn't. It wasn't anywhere close to what to where we are now. It was actually pretty dignified and substantive in comparison.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Do you think maybe we're living in a simulation and like the developers, programmers are just trying to push the limits on what they can
like,
get,
they're
what
going to
game
believe
they
that
can
this
develop?
is real, right? Yeah, no. Sometimes
just,
I find myself pinching myself and saying, "Is this really happening? Is this?" But it really is.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, yeah, and just that whole the Trump assassination attempt too is just so crazy how he just turned his head. I think every time I think about it, it's like, man, that's like, I'm not particularly religious, and I think a lot of people that even aren't particularly religious are like, well, God chose Trump. Like he's anointing him. It's that's another thing.
Quite an extraordinary event. Yeah.
Right, and that's why I think it really made it has elevated, I think, Trump to this folk hero status, and that making him an unstoppable force now in American politics. I just don't think anybody has a chance against him. Do you think that they're going to try to take him out again?
Well, I don't know that they tried to take him out again. We'll get back to our conspiracy, whatever. I still think it was incompetence. At the most I would say is like maybe they deliberately, reduced the Secret Service personnel that were, reduced the number that were assigned to him, just in the hopes that something might happen. That's not impossible. But
they removed his normal Secret Service detail the day before. I think was what they said. Right, which is a little bit suspicious.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, Again, I haven't seen any reason to believe that there was a plot to kill him. But it's possible. We've talked about it. It's just there are those people out there that believe that he, or at least they pretend to believe. Sometimes I wonder how much they really believe it. There's this rhetoric. It's just it's true throughout the West. The elite uses this very inflated rhetoric. For example, about Russia and Europe. Yeah, Russia's going to invade. After they get Ukraine, they're going to go for Poland and the Baltic Sea, and then there's going to be the rest of us. They talk. Leading Western leaders talk like this, right? And a lot of the leading media outlets, publish these kind of opinions. Yet, you would think if they really believed it, they would be, just doing whatever's possible to prepare themselves. It's just like, what do you say? It's like turning heaven and earth just to build up their military, to conscript people. If they really thought there was going to be a war in a couple of years, they were going to be attacked by Russia. But then you find what Britain has gone from 2.3% to 2.5%. And that's basically what you find all through. It's just sort of the actions don't really match the rhetoric. So I just kind of wonder, I don't know if they really believe it, or they just have such a feeble grip on reality that they don't really understand what it takes. If you believe it, you ought to be gearing up your economy and so forth. Again, like in the case of Britain, it was back in 1991, they spent 4.1%. So they're way below it. There's just no signs that that they're, you look at their budgets and you don't see any evidence that they're actually preparing for some sort of attack by Russia. Then you listen to the rhetoric, and they seem to believe it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing anyway. I'm just saying it's just like with all this inflated rhetoric about Trump, again, it's like I wonder how many of these people really believe it. Are they really scared, or is just something you say is just kind of a way of inflating your own importance? But the problem with that rhetoric is that, the problem with that rhetoric is that there are a lot of people out there that are kind of unbalanced, and they hear that and they really believe it. It may have been true of this young man. We don't know yet, but it could be true of somebody else. There may be somebody else out there that's hearing this and say, oh God, I've got to be the one who stops him. I'm going to.
Right. Well, it's exciting when you think that there's some existential battle happening all the time. I think people get swept up by that, and I can sometimes feel it too. And I have to remind myself that, like, okay, this isn't good. For an example would be like with Israel and Lebanon. part of me is just saying, Israel, just do it. Do it. Go ahead and invade Lebanon and just watch hell get unleashed, and see what happens. And then it's like, I should, but there will be so much death and destruction. But part of me is like, I just want it to happen. So I feel like it's going to happen. And maybe this is the only way that Israel is going to learn or do something. But really the right solution is like diplomacy, like stop aid, like to limit bloodshed, but you get caught up into it and you see, you see it escalate, you just saw, Israel bombed Yemen and, the drone that hit Tel Aviv, and you're just like, all right, let's just do it. Gloves are off. Let's go. And that's a dangerous feeling that can kind of sweep up the world when, and even though, and you're not personally involved, like, well, I'm not in Lebanon. I'm not in Israel. So why am I egging on this conflict?
Yeah.
And so I have to tell myself, like, no, we got to restrain, because it's exciting, that war fever. And I think that's what's happening. And it happens on the political arena. People are getting excited about the idea, like, oh my God, Trump's coming back, and it's Hitler times 10. This is a big deal, guys. It's a big deal. We got to do something. It's exciting for people. And then the same thing on the Trump side. I feel the same fervor too. I'm like, yeah, maybe we can do some change. We can start, and then I have to realize, like, temper expectations. I'm not expecting anything really to change with Trump. I think he's embodying the right ideas and movements, but I don't expect it. Yeah, by and large, there's a lot of things in there that I don't agree with, but I can't get excited about it because I know it's not going to happen. But it's just that's the problem with, I think, just sort of mass psychology, and it's just a football game for people. These narratives, they get excited about these big global events, and they makes them feel important to have these strong opinions on it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, you have to be careful. You don't want to be swept up with war fever, especially. Well, I mean, you have a right if you're putting your own body on the line. Like you say, I'm going to go and sign up. Right. Okay, that's one thing. Yeah. We're talking about, like, the Russians who responded to the Crocus City Hall. Okay, a lot of young men went out and they signed up after that. Okay, you can't. Okay, you
put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. Right. You've got a right to voice this opinion entirely, because exactly. But we definitely don't want to be encouraging war fever in other countries where we're never going to be at risk. It's not our house that's going to be blown up. It's not our family members that are going to be killed. We can only hope for a diplomatic solution. It just realistically, it seems like the outlook is very, very bleak, and the chance for a diplomatic solution is very meager at this point.
Right. Because our elites, the rulers of the West, they have made it clear that they don't believe in diplomacy. They don't want to engage in diplomacy.
Right.
They just want, they're demagogues. That's what they want. They want to feed the war fever. Basically, they can grasp more power when they do it, when they get their population stirred up for it. And so it's
just they've demonized all their enemies. It's just there's no way to, they painted themselves in a corner. So you can only, push a military solution. You can only, aim to actually overthrow, defeat militarily your opponent. That's where they put themselves, vis-a-vis Putin and Hamas and so forth. And, that's why we're in this fix that we're in.
Well, this conversation is getting me kind of depressed. There's nothing we can do. Do you have any optimism for a Trump presidency or the future of the United States? Do you think that there can be real changes? And if so, how does that happen? How does it manifest?
Yeah, well, I'm not optimistic. I'm quite pessimistic. There's, you can always hope. Sometimes I can't really think of an instance right now, but you can't be surprised. There are forces in the wings. There are realistic voices. I guess the problem is, again, if we go back to Ukraine and Gaza, the two major wars that are underway right now, is that they tend to, unfortunately, there are very few who are for ending both of those war. And it's just like you do find significant, even if minority voices on one side or the other. People who want to end the war in Gaza and protect the rights of the Palestinians. But then a lot of those people, see Putin as the devil and vice versa. So, there is a potential, of course. I mean, if maybe we can't have both, but maybe we could have one or the other. I guess what I worry about in the case of like Ukraine is that, okay, you do have these voices of reason coming from people like David Sachs, who gave a great speech at the convention, and J.D. Vance, at least in talking about Ukraine. His understanding of Ukraine is, I think, very solid. But even these people, the concrete proposals that have been put forward, like by the Trump team and so forth, I still fall well short. I think we had, for example, Grinnell recently, who may end up being Trump's Secretary of State, basically proposing, the Minsk Accord all over again. But it's just, it's obviously a few years too late. It was, back then he was part of the anti-Russia. He didn't do anything to support it. Now that it's too late, he's coming out, and I just don't know. I don't really see a path to peace in either place. I think things are going to get worse in both places before they get better.
Yeah, I'm more hopeful that we will see more peace with Trump, just because Trump loves to negotiate. I think he's not afraid to talk to other leaders. That there will be some communication and diplomacy. Just the fact that he went to North Korea and talked to Kim Jong-un. I think that's what you need. You need people to go.
Obviously,
there's this idea now in the establishment that you can only talk to our people. You're not allowed to talk to
that's
anybody.
really
It's
bizarre. I remember it was back then. It was the lefties who said that we ought to be talking to our adversaries. And it was the right wingers who tended to, not all of them, but tended to demonize them. But now it's just, for some reason, the Democratic establishment they always go have fits when Trump or Orban or whatever tries to go and talk to these people. And I thought that's what we're supposed to be all about. If you're a believer in peace, and then you're a believer in diplomatic solutions. And if you want a diplomatic solution, you have to start talking. So what is it?
Words, not bullets. Come on, it's not that complicated, guys. It's let's don't do this. So I do get excited a little bit about the Trump movement, just because I feel like it is the death of neoconservatism, which has just been such a horrible policy that's really ingrained.
Let's hope so. If he can really make some dents in that,
I hope so, but. Yeah, so I'm hoping that'll lead to a more peaceful world. It is interesting to see. We've talked about this a little bit before, that the Republican Party is a new party now. It's a peace party and a party for the working class. Right. It's really it's the Democrats now of the 60s and 70s.
Not exactly, but there's some truth to that. I wouldn't quite say it's the peace party, because of, again, the extreme positions that they take vis-a-vis Israel. And J.D. Vance was saying that we got to bomb the what out of the Iranians and so on.
Sometimes I hope that's just political posturing, because they feel like they have to say that with when you're on Hannity's show on Fox, and the questions are like this, and he's playing to the base, and maybe thinks that he has to play the military-industrial complex in some regards, but. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Maybe they will start war in the Middle East and end it in Ukraine. But I just know at least Trump has the ability to talk to people. Even when he killed Soleimani, he called up Iran and was able to cool things down. Mm-hmm. Because I remember when that happened, I was like, it's going to pop off now. This is a big deal.
And he's completely right about that. He should be talking to all these people. And the Democrats are just, they've betrayed all their principles. And, in opposing this. There's this nonsense that somehow you're friendly to autocrats, and this kind of makes you like it's like these are just evil demons, and if you talk to them, it's just like their demonic influence is going to rub off on you or something. It's just absurd, It's just
right. Well, barring the position on Iran and Israel Palestine, do you feel like you can draw that parallel of the Republican Party now is like the Democratic Party of the 70s? In what ways are they similar? In what ways are they different?
Well,
because if you talk about cultural issues, the Republican Party isn't, they're not against gay marriage or, against, a lot of the, race, racism isn't a thing. Jim Crow isn't a thing. The Republican Party isn't a racist party. It's not a sexist party, even though the Democrats try to paint that.
Yeah, they try to paint it that way. I mean, it would like the Democrats. I put it this way, actually, like the Democrats still use a lot of the rhetoric that came out of the '60s, but we live in a different world now. We really do, and especially in the case of talking about racism, whatever they had a valid point. Not that all their policies were right or anything by any means, but that there was. Jim Crow wasn't that far in the past and so on, but it is far in the past now. The problems that exist, like for example within the black community, are not the problems that existed in the 1960s, or at least maybe some of them are, but others aren't. Things have changed very significantly. So that rhetoric is really kind of just an archaic rhetoric that is covering up, real problems and the possibility for real solutions. And then I think the most dramatic change really is the party's position vis-a-vis the working class. I mean, it was like back in the '60s, the Democrats were they were the party of the unions. I mean, that was sort of the main difference. Now, there was sort of a new cultural, aspect to it that was introduced in the 60s, but still, by and large, the Democrats were about unions and workers. And that has just changed utterly. So that, just like every poll shows that workers, the working class in general, is just much more comfortable with the Republican Party than it is with the Democrat Party.
Okay, interesting. Well, okay, I think, is there anything else that maybe you want to cover? I feel like we've been focusing a lot on domestic politics. It's hard not to be with what's happening.
Well, maybe
right now,
a lot of things have been happening, especially in Ukraine, but, maybe we can do it next time.
Okay. Yeah. We can shift the focus back to geopolitics on Wednesday then.
Yeah.
Okay. Then, if there's nothing else, I think we can end it there then.
Okay.
All right. Have a good day, Dad.
You too.